Hello and welcome to Her Revenge Arc. This is a sanctuary for stories that honor the silent strategists, the quiet architects of their own vindication. We are here to explore the journeys of women who were relegated to the footnotes of their own family histories, only to reveal that they were, in fact, the authors of a secret, far more compelling narrative. My name is Amelia, and today, I will tell you the story of my future, the one my family believed they had the right to sacrifice, and the real one I had been building for years in a place they couldn't even fathom, let alone access. In the ecosystem of my family, my brother Leo was the sun. He was brilliant, dazzling, and everything revolved around him. My parents were his devoted planets, their lives and resources orbiting his every whim, their faces perpetually tilted towards his warmth. I was not a planet. I was, perhaps, a distant comet, occasionally streaking into their field of vision, noted with mild interest before their gaze returned, inevitably, to their sun. This was not a dynamic that developed over time. It was the physics of our household, a law as immutable as gravity, established from our earliest moments. Leo's charisma was his greatest currency. He could spin tales of future glory from the most gossamer of threads, his confidence so absolute that it created its own reality field. My parents were his most ardent believers. His potential was the family's singular, most precious asset. My potential, on the other hand, was treated as a utility, reliable, steady resource like electricity or running water, expected to be there but rarely marveled at. This distinction colored every aspect of our upbringing. I remember when I was 12, winning the Regional Mathematics Olympiad. I came home with a small trophy and a certificate. My father glanced at it, nodded and said, "Good work, Amelia. Keep it up." The trophy was placed on a bookshelf in my room, behind a row of books. 2 weeks later, Leo won a Most Improved Player ribbon for his Little League baseball team. A ribbon. My parents threw a celebratory barbecue for the entire neighborhood. The ribbon was professionally framed and mounted in the center of the living room wall, where it remains to this day. The message, as always, was clear. His effort was heroic, my achievement was simply expected. This environment created two very different people. Leo blossomed under the constant adoration, developing an unshakable belief in his own destiny, a conviction that the world was merely a stage awaiting his grand performance. He learned to talk a magnificent game. I, conversely, learned to operate in the quiet, shadowed spaces where true work is done. I learned that my value was not in what I said, but in what I could build. While Leo was practicing his charming speeches, I was immersing myself in the silent, elegant logic of economic theory and the complex, beautiful world of data science. My parents saw my countless hours in front of a computer screen as a sign of my introversion, my social awkwardness. They thought I was retreating from the world. In reality, I was building the tools I would need to conquer it on my own terms. The crucible of our story, the asset that would bring this quiet, lifelong conflict to its devastating climax, was my college fund. This fund was not a gift from my parents. It was a sacred trust, born from my own relentless labor and the profound foresight of my grandmother, the only person in my family who ever looked past my quiet exterior and saw the fire within. Shortly before she passed away, my grandmother, a woman whose own quiet brilliance had been subsumed by the demands of her time, took me aside. She pressed a check for $10,000 into my hand. Her fingers were frail, but her grip was firm. "Amelia," she said, her eyes looking deep into mine, "your mind is a diamond. Don't ever let them treat you like common stone. Use this to build yourself a door that only you have the key to." That $10,000 became my obsession. It was the seed from which I would grow my independence. For the next 4 years of high school, I became a machine of quiet accumulation. Every weekend I worked at the local library, the scent of old books and floor polish becoming the scent of my freedom. I became the go-to tutor for the most difficult subjects: calculus, physics, economics. Me patience and clarity, earning me a steady stream of income from the parents of my struggling classmates. I meticulously researched and applied for every academic grant and scholarship I could find, winning several that were considered too small or too much work for most students to bother with. Every dollar was a brick in the wall of my future. I deposited everything into a single high-yield savings account. For legal reasons, as I was a minor for most of this period, my mother had to be a cosigner. Her name on my account was a small, necessary compromise, a vulnerability I accepted at the time. By the day of my high school graduation, through my own relentless, unceasing effort, the account held a perfect, beautiful balance of $50,000. It was my masterpiece. It was my escape hatch. It was my acceptance letter to a top-tier university's renowned economics program, fully funded by my own hand. It was, I believed, the key to the door my grandmother had told me to build. But as I was cementing my own future, I could see the cracks forming in the foundation of my family's great hope. Leo, having dropped out of business school after 2 semesters, declaring it an archaic institution incapable of containing his vision, had anointed himself a tech startup CEO. His venture had a name that sounded both impressive and utterly meaningless: Synergy AI. He described it as a next-generation, AI-integrated platform for the paradigm-shifting optimization of enterprise workflow. He had a logo. He had a deck of slick, jargon-filled slides. He had boundless enthusiasm. What he did not have was a product, a line of code, or a single client. He was selling an empty box, and my parents were buying it with their life savings. I became a silent observer of their slow-motion financial ruin. I heard their hushed arguments late at night, the words second mortgage and retirement portfolio whispered like profanities. My father, a man who had always been so proud of his financial prudence, now had the haunted look of a gambler on a losing streak. My mother's voice on the phone grew brittle, her forced cheerfulness like a thin layer of ice over a deep, dark body of water. They were liquidating their own futures and pouring them into the insatiable furnace of my brother's ego. And I knew, with the cold, dispassionate certainty of a risk analyst, that it would not be enough. Soon they would come for mine. The realization settled on me not with the jolt, but with a slow, creeping dread. My mother's name on my account, the backdoor, the vulnerability. For a time I felt a paralyzing fear. My instinct was to confront them, to plead with them, to show them the flaws in Leo's plan. But I knew it would be futile. My concerns would be dismissed as petty jealousy. My pragmatism would be seen as a lack of faith in my brother's genius. To them, my meticulously saved $50,000 was not the culmination of my life's work. It was just a pool of capital sitting there, waiting to be deployed for a higher, more important purpose, Leo. And then one night, sitting in my room, staring at the account balance on my laptop screen, something shifted within me. I stopped thinking like their daughter. I started thinking like an economist. You don't argue with an irrational market. You don't try to reason with a bubble. You hedge. You diversify. You build a firewall. You create a system that protects you from the predictable consequences of others' folly. My grandmother had told me to build a door. It was time to build a vault. My plan was not one of confrontation. It was a masterpiece of substitution and subterfuge. It required absolute secrecy and the one skill I had in abundance: patience. The first step was quiet and simple. I opened a new bank account at a completely different, online-only institution. An account that was mine and mine alone. The second step was the slow, methodical process of moving the money. Over the next 6 months, I siphoned my life savings from the joint account to my private one. I did it in dozens of small, irregular transfers, each one meticulously logged in a private spreadsheet. To anyone watching, it would look like the normal spending of a teenager preparing for college purchases for a new laptop, software, textbooks, a security deposit for a dorm. Once the real money was secure in my private account, I began the third, most crucial phase, the investment. For years, I had been studying the burgeoning world of cryptocurrency. I wasn't a starry-eyed gambler chasing trends. I was an analyst, fascinated by the underlying blockchain technology, the principles of decentralization, and the potential for a new financial ecosystem. I approached it not as a lottery ticket, but as a long-term, high-risk, high-reward asset allocation. I didn't just buy Bitcoin. I built a carefully diversified portfolio. A solid 40% went into the established behemoths Bitcoin and Ethereum. 30% I invested in a basket of promising mid-cap altcoins whose projects I had thoroughly researched, projects focused on supply chain logistics, data verification, and cross-border payments. The final 30% was my high-risk allocation. I invested directly into the seed rounds of several very small, very new blockchain startups, companies run not by charismatic salesmen, but by brilliant cryptographers and engineers. I secured my assets in a hardware wallet, a cold storage device that was offline and unhackable. My $50,000 future was no longer a number in a bank. It was a silent, growing force, secured by layers of cryptographic armor. The final piece of my strategy was the construction of the decoy. The original joint account now sat empty. Using the income from my ongoing tutoring and library work, I began to painstakingly rebuild it. I didn't aim for the original $50,000. That would be too perfect. I built it up to $48,752.16. It was a real, believable number. A number that suggested minor, recent expenses. The account looked healthy. It looked real. It was a perfect illusion. A stage, beautifully dressed and lit, for a tragedy I hoped would never be staged. But I knew my family. I knew their desperation. I knew it was only a matter of time before they took their places. I left for my first semester of university with a heavy heart, but a clear mind. The calls from home were a predictable script. A few perfunctory questions about my classes, my roommate, the food in the dining hall. And then, the inevitable pivot to the real subject. The only subject. Leo. Leo was in talks with a graphic designer for his logo. Leo had rented a chic downtown office space. Leo was on the verge of a major breakthrough that would change everything. My mother's voice was the barometer of their desperation. It grew thinner, higher, more brittle with each passing week. "It's just a matter of bridging the gap, Amelia," she explained, her voice unnaturally bright. "All startups have this phase. Takes money to make money. But the venture capitalists are circling. Your brother is going to be a giant. This will all be worth it in the end. It was the language of someone trying to convince themselves, not me. I knew the end was near. The axe fell during winter break. I was home for what was supposed to be a restful 2 weeks, but the house was thick with unspoken panic. Leo, ever the showman, dominated every conversation, throwing around buzzwords like synergy, disruption, and first-mover advantage. My parents watched him with a terrifying mixture of adoration and raw fear. In those 2 weeks, not one person asked me a single question about my economics research project, for which I had just received a commendation from the dean. I was invisible. The day before I was due to fly back to campus, my mother approached me. Her hands were twisting the handle of her purse, her gaze fixed on a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. "Amelia, honey, your father and I need to ask you something." We sat down at the kitchen table, the site of so many years of my silent breakfasts. "You know that we love you," she began, the preamble to a betrayal. "And we are so proud of everything you've accomplished. But Leo, his company, he is on the 1-yard line. He has a major investor ready to sign a huge deal. But the investor wants to see that the family is 100% behind him. A final show of faith. A bridge loan to get him through the next 60 days. She finally met my eyes and hers were swimming with tears. "We need to use your college fund. It's just a loan. As soon as the deal closes, we will pay you back every single cent, plus a bonus for your trouble. We're a family, Amelia. When one of us succeeds, we all succeed. This is for all of us." I looked at her, at my mother, who was asking me to immolate my own carefully constructed future on the altar of my brother's ego. And the strangest thing happened. I felt nothing. The anger and sadness I might have once felt had been replaced by a vast, quiet emptiness. The final data point had arrived. The model was complete. I knew any protests would be a waste of breath. They weren't asking for permission. They were giving me notice. So I performed my role. I let my face crumble. I let my voice shake. I summoned a single perfect tear. "But my tuition for next semester, my dream." That evening, my father delivered the final verdict. "This is not a debate, Amelia," he said, his voice heavy with a sense of righteous authority. "A family makes sacrifices for one another. Your brother is building an empire. Your education can be paused. His momentum cannot." The next morning, I stood silently at the bank and signed the withdrawal form. I watched the teller count out stack after stack of $100 bills. $48,000. I saw the look on my parents' faces, a toxic cocktail of relief, shame, and unshakable conviction that they were making a noble sacrifice for the greater good of the family. They walked out of that bank believing they held my future in a leather briefcase. They had no idea it was just an empty box. The months that followed were an exercise in denial. Their phone calls were filled with frantic, happy updates. "The launch party is going to be epic," Leo declared. "We're inviting all the tech journalists." My mother would add. "The investor is flying in next week. We're so close, Amelia. We'll have your money back to you before you know it." I would listen, murmur a few non-committal words, and hang up. Then I would turn to my own life. I paid my next semester's tuition. I excelled in my classes. I started working as a paid research assistant for one of the world's leading behavioral economists. And I watched my real portfolio. The market was in a period of unprecedented growth. My initial $50,000 investment had crossed the $200,000 mark. Then 300, then 400. It was a silent, secret river of wealth, growing deeper and wider with each passing day. The end of Synergy AI came not with a bang, but with a pathetic whimper. The launch party was a disaster. The tech journalists who showed up were unimpressed by a slick presentation for a product that was nothing more than a series of mock-ups. The big investor never materialized because he had never existed. The money was gone. Every last cent. Incinerated on extravagant office furniture, inflated salaries for Leo's unqualified friends, and one last, desperate party. The phone call from my mother was the one I had been expecting for 2 years. She was hysterical. Sobs racked her body, making her words almost unintelligible. "It's gone, Amelia, all of it. The house, Dad's retirement, it's all gone. And your college money, oh my God, Amelia, what have we done? Your future, we've ruined your future." I let her sob until she was exhausted. Then in the ensuing silence I said, my voice as calm and clear as a frozen lake, "We need to have a family meeting. I'm coming home this weekend." When I walked through the front door of my childhood home that Saturday, it felt like stepping onto the set of a tragedy in its final act. The house itself seemed to sag with the weight of failure. My father, a man who had always stood so tall, was slumped in his armchair, looking frail and defeated. My mother's face was a puffy, tear-stained mask. And Leo, the son, the golden child, was a black hole on the living room sofa, staring vacantly at a blank television screen, his charisma extinguished. They all turned to look at me as I entered. Their expressions were a painful blend of shame, guilt, and a terrifying, misplaced hope that I, the quiet, responsible one, could somehow wave a magic wand and undo the damage. We gathered at the dining room table. I opened my laptop and placed it in the center. First, I logged into the online portal for the joint savings account. I showed them the history, the slow, steady deposits, and the single massive withdrawal. Current balance, $0. This was my college fund, I stated, my voice neutral. The future you took. My mother's composure broke completely. We're so sorry, Amelia, she wept. We will work for the rest of our lives. We will do anything to make this right. That won't be necessary, I said. I closed the browser tab and opened another. It was the dashboard for my cryptocurrency portfolio. The main number glowed stark in green in the dim room. On that day, at that moment, the market value of my assets was $512,381.42. I said nothing. I just let them look. I watched my father lean forward, his eyes squinting at the screen in disbelief. I saw my mother's tears stop as her brain tried to process the number. And I saw Leo's head lift, his vacant eyes focusing for the first time, a flicker of comprehension, then utter, soul-crushing horror dawning on his face. He was the one who understood first. He was the one who realized he had been playing checkers while I had been playing a grandmaster-level game of chess. What is that? My father finally managed to ask, his voice a dry whisper. That, I said, my gaze moving from my father to my mother to my brother, is my real future. The one you never knew about. The one I built for myself piece by piece, in the shadows of your obsession. The one I built because I always knew, that you would one day feel entitled to take the other one from me. I explained everything. My grandmother's advice. The secret account. The slow methodical transfers. The research. The diversified investments. The decoy. I presented it not as a story of betrayal, but as a case study in risk management, my voice calm and dispassionate. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. It was the sound of a world breaking. You let us, my father said, his voice cracking with a mix of awe and accusation. You knew we were going to do it, and you let us fail. I finally allowed a flicker of my true feelings to show. No, I said, my voice hardening just enough to cut. I knew you were a bad investment. I analyzed the data, and I protected my assets from a predictable market crash. You didn't steal my future. You gambled away your own. The second mortgage is real. Your depleted retirement is real. That debt is real. That is the outcome of your choices. This, I gestured to the laptop, is the outcome of mine. I stood up and closed the laptop, the click echoing in the silent room. I'm returning to school tomorrow. I will be pursuing my master's degree, and then my PhD. My life is my own. You are not a part of it. You have no claim on it. I walked out of that house, leaving them in the ruins they had built. I did not offer them a single dollar. I did not offer a word of comfort. My compassion had been extinguished by years of their casual neglect. Their problems were the direct result of their own flawed system, and I was no longer a part of that system. My victory was not in their ruin. It was in my quiet, unassailable independence. It was in the door my grandmother told me to build, a door that I had not only walked through, but had fortified with a vault of my own making. And so I leave you with this question. When you are made to feel that your worth is secondary, that your dreams are a resource for others to consume, is the ultimate act of revenge a loud and fiery confrontation, or is it the quiet, meticulous construction of a new reality so successful, so independent, that you can simply turn and walk away from the ashes of the old one, without a single backward glance? Thank you for listening to her revenge arc. If my story has moved you, I hope you will share it. Please like this video and subscribe for more stories of justice, precisely engineered and flawlessly executed. I look forward to reading your thoughts and your own stories of strategic triumph in the comments below.